Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here, and today I have for you guys the latest Nahida changes. This is Math Guide 4. It's not a com guide, but it's really talking about the latest Nahida changes and what's the impact or updates for the two comps that we've covered previously. Nahida Nilou com, which is the Bloom com, and Nahida AggraSpread com. And obviously there will be updated damage figures as well. Okay, and we'll do a quick TLDR and what's next. So without further ado, let's talk about the latest Nahida changes. So first off, the A1 passive buff was improved. Basically, instead of 20% of the EM of the party member with the highest EM, it's 25%. So the maximum you can gain is 250 instead of 200. Okay. So yeah, maybe I should start including this, right? Because if you guys have followed my math previously, I actually did not include the 250 EM buff for Coco, not just Kokomi on field time, but all the on field time for the Bountiful Core comp. Next, the mix, which is easily the most important update of this week's beta version, which is Tri-Karma ICD and application changes. Effectively, instead of two variants, previously it was 1U. Previously it was 1U every 1.9 seconds or 2U every 3.8 seconds, with two different builds across different beta testers. Right now, from what I can tell, it seems like there's only one version. It's 1.5U, 2.5 seconds interval. Without electro in party, it's 2.5 second default. No ICD, and total duration is now 25 seconds. So previously it was 20 seconds, 1U or 2U, and interval was 1.9 seconds. And 1U or 2U has 1U has no ICD, 2U has standard ICD, if I didn't remember wrongly. Yeah. In fact, the actual ICD is like 1 second now, but since you don't really ever get to hit that 1 second, it's as good as no ICD. Okay, so now to conclude, right, it's 1.5U, no ICD, 2.5 seconds interval. In fact, if you look at the uni gauge, right, it looks like we're getting something in the middle, right? So instead of 1U or 2U, we're getting 1.5U. But if you look at the interval timing, a middle timing is more like 2.85 seconds. But we are getting 2.5 seconds here. So it's actually a buff. It's a really important buff because it makes her Dendro application much stronger. Because if you think about it, right, 1.5U every 2.5 seconds is much better than what most characters have now in their application. Those with standard ICD is 1U every 2.5 seconds. Those without, like Nilou or Kokomi, Nilou's Tranquility Aura, Kokomi's E, right, it's like 1U every 2 seconds. I know Nilou's is slightly less than 2 seconds, but for all intents and purposes, it's just 2 seconds. Okay, so 1U every 2 seconds versus 1.5U every 2.5 seconds. Obviously, the 1.5U every 2.5 seconds is very much better. And I can tell you, it basically ensures that Nahida can guarantee Hydro triggers in Bountiful Core comp, and also make 3 as Hydro 1 Dendro better and easier and more feasible. And it's not just the Bloom comp for Nilou and Nahida, it opens up a lot of options. Especially coupled with a Q buff changes, I think Burden/Burning can actually work well now. Because you get enough Dendro application. But I'll delve more into that when we eventually go into those comps. So other than the Tri-Karma change, that's a really good buff for Nahida. Basically a Dendro Archon worthy buff. We also have Q changes coming. So essentially all of the Q buffs are improved. For Pyro, you get a better damage bonus. In fact, if you look at level 12 or even level 9, with 2 Pyro characters effect, you get 37.9% and 44.6%, which is quite a substantial boost already, right? Which is what I'm trying to see here. It actually looks very substantial now, with 2 Pyro characters or C1. I kind of expected that such changes are coming because C1 was really weak before this. I mean, even now, I don't think it's that great, but at least it's better than before. This is also the reason why I say Burden/Burning is looking good now, because if you set it up correctly, you also get better Tri-Karma damage through her Q. Through Nahida's Q. Get better Tri-Karma damage, which is also her main source of damage. Although you need spread for that. If you have spread on Tri-Karma, it actually does like about 70 to 80k on the stats and the permutation that I have shared previously. Okay. Now the second effect here is the electro cooldown decrease. The cooldown decrease has been increased, but that's to be expected because the interval for Trikarma has also increased, right? It increased from 1.9 seconds to 2.5 seconds. So technically speaking, this change is kind of not enough to cover the previous. Okay, so interval wise, with 2S electro and level 9 Q, is 1.87 seconds interval. From 2.5 with the electro effect goes to, with the buffed electro effect goes to 1.87 seconds. And 2.08 with 1S electro. What this means is that with the 1.87 seconds, not as fast as 1.47 seconds previously, right? Because previously it was 1.4 seconds. But 1.47 seconds was the Trikarma damage proc. If you assume 1U no ICD, then yeah, you get a spread every 1.47 seconds as well. But I did feel that 2U standard ICD permutation was more likely even before this change, because the 1U no ICD was looking a little too good for AggraSpread. So if I compare it against 2U standard ICD, right, we're actually getting 1.87 seconds versus 2.94 seconds, at least for the spreads. So it's a very nice buff for her AggraSpread if you look at it that way, right? Because it goes from 2.94 second one spread from her Trikarma to 1.87 second every Trikarma spread. Obviously, our Trikarma damage number of instances gets affected slightly because you go from 1.47 to 1.87, right? Regardless of whether it's 1U or 2U previously. But you do get more spreads. So in AggraSpread comp, this is actually really good. Okay, and it makes sense for me to talk about AggraSpread here because it's electro, right? Obviously, you can have Hyper Bloom as well, but nevertheless, with the faster and stronger Dendro application, it just benefits all comps really. Okay, yeah. Oh, and if you have a level 12 Q, then you get 1.76 instead of 1.87. Okay. If you have seen my AggraSpread comp, you know that level 12 Q always gives you like plus one more instance of the Trikarma damage or damage slash spread. And we'll talk more about that later in these two sections. Let's talk about the Hydro, right? I know that a lot of people think that the Hydro duration is useless because you already have 100% uptime, right? It's 15 second duration, 13.5 second cooldown. And it's true, it's 100% uptime. There's nothing wrong with that. But I can tell you guys, the Hydro buff, even with it being increased further, it still helps because it makes the rotation and the ER requirements much easier. Because you don't need to recast a Q on cooldown. Think about it. Really think about it. With this added, it basically means that it lasts for a very long duration. At level 12, you even have 25 seconds. At level 9, it's 23.5 seconds. So it makes things very comfortable. And don't forget the high EM buff that she's providing, right? 250 EM buff. So yeah, I think the Hydro bonus is pretty decent. I mean, it's not super important, but it helps a lot. It makes your rotation and your ER requirements much easier. Okay, that's very important. Now, I'm kind of tempted to explore Rainbow Com with C1 Nahida. Maybe. By Rainbow Com, I mean one Nahida with one Pyro, one Electro, one Hydro. Oh, and obviously with the C1 effect. So yeah, maybe not. We'll see how it goes because there's a lot of comms to do for Nahida in future. The near future. Which is like next week. Or slightly end of next week. Stuff like that. Around that time frame. Okay. So yeah. Pretty interesting, right? Although, okay, going back to the Hydro point, right? If you are somehow doing, say, a 27-second rotation, then it makes sense to recast a Q on cooldown, even if you have Hydro. Why? If you have C6 effect. So you basically get your C6 effect twice in the 27-second rotation. But 27-second rotation is kind of long of a rotation, yeah? So it's probably not something I'll do in the math, but I'll probably try out in terms of the actual gameplay in future. Oh, and thankfully, with all of the changes being done here, luckily none of them change her cooldowns or reduces her Trikarma. It increases the duration but it doesn't reduce. So all the rotations I've done so far can remain as is. Thankfully. Okay. So let's okay. So we've gone through the changes. We talk about what the impact is and what it means in terms of other comps as well. Now let's look at the last two comps that we did previously. We'll go for the Nahida Nilou first. Let's look at the updated number of elemental application instances or units for the Dendro. So for the details on the com, rotation, ER, Nahida stats, etc., please refer to Nahida Math Guide 2. I'm not going to bring up any of those here. So effectively, if I bring your attention to Nahida, because Nahida is the one that went through the beta change, right? You'll see that there's additional 2, it's a +2 here. Now, for the Hydro characters, what I'm doing here is this is really the number of elemental application instances. For Dendro characters, however, it's really the units in terms of the unit gauge theory, like 1U, 2U, etc. Because that's the best way for me to illustrate what the recent beta change did. So in terms of Dendro application, it's above. You can see it's a +2U. So effectively, it's 12U from 8 procs versus 10U from either 5 or 10 procs previously. Because remember, we had two variants, right? 1U, no ICD, and 2U standard ICD. So now with a 1.5U no ICD, with a longer interval, we have 12U from 8 procs versus 10U. So this is also better for 1S Dendro and 3S Hydro, right? Obviously. And with the new changes, we also get better EM buff to the active character, more notably to Nilou's Q plus 1 is Tranquility or Aura proc, and also the Kokomi's on field time, which actually, if you think about it, is quite a lot of Hydro triggers. Like for Nilou, it's like one for three of the Hydro triggers, first rotation, and second rotation is actually 5 because of how long her body full call lasts and how long the Q lasts. And you have about 7 to 8 or even more for Kokomi. So the better EM buff really helps a lot more for even more of the bountiful cost. It's about 40% of the bountiful cost. Yeah, 40% of the bountiful cost get this 250 EM buff, which my math figures did not include. Okay. And obviously, with now having 12U from 8 procs instead of 10U from either 5 or 10, the scenario that we have now is it's much easier to maintain the hydro triggers because you have higher Dendro application. So you are able to do your hydro triggers easily. I'm pretty sure 2S Dendro, 2S Hydro, you shouldn't have any issue with hydro triggers. For 1S Dendro, 3S Hydro, C6 I'm pretty confident it works. Without C6, with the recent buff, I think it's still feasible. Well, you have to see. Okay, when we actually look into it in detail. So for the Nahida Nilou comp, there's actually no changes to damage figures because I did not include the Year 1 EM buff to begin with. Okay, that's number one. Number two, in terms of the stronger Dendro application, what it means is that in terms of gameplay, the new changes do make it easier to achieve the damage figures that I have done, especially for single enemy scenario. For 2+ enemies, it's still dependent on the enemy spawn rate, health, etc. to maintain the quadratic scaling portion of it. Okay? So yeah, this stronger Dendro from Nahida now is really, really good. Okay, so that's for the Bountiful Core Com. Let's move on to talk about Nahida AggraSpread because like I said, there's no changes to damage figure because I did not include A1 EM buff to begin with. And the Bountiful Cores are based on Hydro triggers. So the increase 2U from Dendro doesn't increase the Hydro triggers per se. It makes it easier to ensure that it's always Hydro trigger. It doesn't increase the total number of Hydro triggers. Let's look at AggraSpread next. So again, same thing. For details on the com rotation ER Nahida stats, please refer to the previous Nahida math guide. But for AggraSpread, it's a different number. It's math guide 3 instead of math guide 2. So in this case, you see for Nahida, you see that it looks like a drop, right? 12/13, it drops to 10/11 from Trikama. And total, instead of 18, 19, 20, is 16, 17, 18. Wait, there's a typo here. This should be C5. So remember what I said? I said that 1U ICD honestly didn't look very likely to me before this chip beta change. So if I compare against 2U standard ICD, it's actually 16, 17, 18 versus 12, 13, 14 instead of 18, 19, 20. So it's still a pretty good buff of +4 spreads. You get 4 more spreads. So it's good. It's definitely good. You get 4 more spreads. Also, the above here, whatever number I've done here, the 10 and 11, it's actually assuming that the tri-karma duration, we only take 20 seconds out of the 25 seconds of the tri-karma duration because of how your rotation works. But when you move on to the second rotation, because now tri-karma lasts 25 seconds, right? Instead of 20 seconds. So there's actually 2 more tri-karma procs that's left over from the first rotation, assuming your enemy is still alive. So if you think about it, right, it's actually the same as the O1U no ICD in terms of the total number of procs. I'm actually intentionally excluding the last 2 procs so that we look at a 22-second rotation in total, with the first 2 seconds setting up our marking, the Sea of Skandar. Okay, so it's definitely above to the AggraSpread figures. Because like I said, although I did math for both 1U no ICD and 2U standard ICD, I didn't feel like 1U no ICD was likely. It felt more like 2U standard ICD is going to be more likely because 1U no ICD was looking a little too good for AggraSpread. So now what we have, the recent change of 1.5U no ICD, is still pretty good for AggraSpread, right? Because it's a +4 from 2U standard ICD. So that's nice. Oh, and as for why C6 only adds 1, please refer to Nahida Math Guide 3 for details. C6 rotation is a bit different as well. Okay, so with all of that said, let's look at the updated damage figures, because for the AggraSpread, we need to see what is the final damage figure, right? Because previously I showed you guys 2 permutations. So now we only have 1 permutation, which is our 1.5U no ICD on the Trikarma, and these are the damage figures. So it's obviously lower than the 1U no ICD because of the interval change, but it's much better than it's definitely better than the 2U standard ICD previously. I'll give you guys a little bit of a info on how much better it is later. And this is damage figure, this is DPS figures. Okay. And let me give you guys a updated Nahida Nilou versus Nahida Yae or AggraSpread comparison. Yeah. So 1.5U no and no ICD in one enemy scenario, which is what we have right now, the new unified scenario. Nahida plus Yae, the AggraSpread comp, will always be better than the Nahida Nilou Bountiful Core comp at C0R1. Assuming you have C0R1 for each of these characters. Okay. At C2R1, even at C2R1, which is like the max potential, almost like the max potential for the Nahida Nilou comp, Nahida Yae is still better. Okay, so AggraSpread is always better in a single enemy scenario, whether you have C0R1 or C2R1. But for 1.5U no ICD with 2 enemies, or to be exact, 2+ enemies because of the quadratic scaling and the limit being 2, reaction ICD, Nahida plus Yae is less than equal. Nahida Nilou at C0R1 for these characters, if we factor in the caveats. Okay. By that I mean that it may not be the perfect bountiful core scenario. Only in that scenario then it's less than equal. But why is it less than equal? I'll talk about it later. For C2R1, as per previous Math Guide 3, AggraSpread still definitely loses out to Nahida Nilou. Because this is really how good the bountiful core skills in terms of quadratic scaling. Okay, it really shows here. Now, so the updated comparison result versus Nahida Nilou, Bloom, or Bountiful Comp is very, very straightforward. It's pretty much the same as the O1U no ICD, right? If you notice, with the key difference being at C0R1, 2+ enemies. Where there is a chance for Nahida Yae, which is the AggraSpread, to be worse than Nahida Nilou. Because it really depends on how long the 2+ enemies last. Remember, I've mentioned it before many times. Quadratic scaling is very, very dependent on always having X number of enemies available. And in this case, it's 2, at least 2. But if you're not able to, then it falls off. So previously, for 1U no for the O1U no ICD, right, it was actually on par at C0R1. But now for the 1.5U no ICD, because of the increased duration, the increased interval, effectively there's a chance for Nahida Yae or the AggraSpread to be worse than the Bountiful Core comp. really dependent on how much of the entire DPS has 2+ enemies. Simple as that. Alright? Okay. So easy conclusion is just simply this. 1.5 ICD is always better than Nahida Nilou in single enemy scenario for AggraSpread, while being on par or worse in 2+ enemies at C0R1, and always worse at C2R1, 2+ enemies. Okay? All of the DPS compared here is single target, okay? It's not because I multiplied the damage, it's because of the quadratic scaling. And the rest of these points here are pretty much the same as previously in Nahida Math Guide 3, but it still applies. Okay, even with the recent beta changes, it still applies, which is why I've left it here, but I'm not going to go through it here. It's basically talking about quadratic scaling as well as the C2R1 versus C6 for AggraSpread. So yeah, this is a relatively quicker video where we talk about the changes and the updated figures and impact. So let's do a quick TLDR. Nahida's Dendro application received a strong improvement. In fact, I should say it's a very strong improvement. Sorry. We should say it's a very strong improvement. A1 EM is improved as well, 200 EM to 250 EM, and Q bars are improved as well, all three, Pyro, Electro, Hydro. So this opens up more options like Burgeon, Burning, one is Dendro 3 as Hydro. I think her C1 is also much stronger now in Hyper Bloom as well. So please refer to the specific session for data. I'm not going to go through more of that here. So updates to Nahida Nilou Bloomcom. With the new changes, effectively we get better EM buff to the active character, and more notably is to Nilou's Q, +1 is Tranquility Aura Prot for her being on field, and Kokomi's on field time, which honestly is quite a fair number of Hydro triggers. It's about 40% of the Hydro triggers. Okay, and this is the breakdown. And not to mention, it's much easier to maintain Hydro triggers now, given the higher Dendro application, because we get additional 2U in a 20 seconds rotation. Now in terms of the damage figures, there are no changes because I did not include the A1 EM buff to begin with. Okay, please remember that I did not include the A1 EM buff to begin with because it was only active character. If I really wanted to, I could, but yeah, it's tedious. That's number one. Number two is well, technically speaking, for Kokomi, she's the biggest benefactor of the A1 EM buff in that comp. So I guess it helps to know that your Kokomi can afford to get slightly lower EM. Okay? If you want to factor in the A1 EM buff. But I'll advise to still follow the EM targets that I've set up previously and treat the 250 EM as an extra bonus to allow you to deal even more damage for the bountiful cost triggered by Kokomi. Now, in terms of gameplay, the new beta changes do make it easier to achieve the damage figures I've talked about, especially for single enemy scenarios. For 2+, it's still dependent on enemy spawn rate, health, etc. to maintain the quadratic scaling, because it's no longer about your skill, it's about the condition of the enemies. Now, updates to Nahida AggraSpread in terms of the number of spreads. Compared against 01U no ICD, it's 16, 17, 18 versus 18, 19, 20. Okay, so 18, 19, 20 is obviously the 01U no ICD. So it's a drop of two spreads, but to begin with, I thought that 1U no ICD seemed a little too good to be true for AggraSpread. And compared against 02U standard ICD, sorry for all the couple of typos here and there because I actually did whip this up. I just finished doing this. Yeah. So it's 16, 17, 18 versus 12, 13, 14. So it's still a pretty good buff of +4 spreads, which is very nice. And also the abuse is assuming that we are only taking 20 seconds of the 25 seconds of the Tri-Karma duration. Should not say this, right? It's only 20 seconds as per how the rotation works. But we all know that now it's 25 seconds. So when you move to the second rotation, there's actually 2 more Tri-Karma procs remaining for the first rotation. So actually in terms of the total number of procs for the full duration, it's actually the same in terms of procs and spreads. But I'm intentionally excluding the last 2 procs so as to look at a 22 seconds rotation in total. Okay? First 2 seconds is setting up the Nahida E. Okay, so finally, the last section of the TLDR is very straightforward. It's about the updated damage figures, right? So basically, in terms of versus Nahida Nilou, 1.5 ICD is always better than Nahida Nilou in a single enemy scenario, while on par or worse in 2+ enemies at C0R1, and always worse at C2R1 for 2+ enemies. Okay, so this is how good the quadratic scaling is. The updated comparison results here is pretty much the same as the old 1 ICD. Key difference is really this portion here, where there's a chance for Nahida Yae or AggraSpread to be worse than Nahida Nilou. Depending on how, it really depends on how long you can get your quadratic scaling. Maintain at least two enemies there. That's how it works. Okay. Because previously it was at least on par. Now there's a chance for it to be worse. There's a chance for it to be on par. Either way. And yeah, like I said, you may not always have 2+ enemies constantly. So these are points that I've already talked about previously in Nahida Math Guide 3. I'm not going to go through them further. I leave them here so that it is an important enough note to remember. But I'll say that in terms of the recent changes, it's really good because it provided about approximately 17% increase to Nahida damage / DPS versus the 2U standard ICD previously. If I take that as the likely result before this change anyway. The likely final result before this change. Now that we have this change, we know that the 1U is gone, the 2U is gone. It's 1.5U every 2.5 seconds, no ICD. Alright. Okay, so that's the end of our video. This is what's coming next. Actually, there's no change because this Nahida video is sort of like a insert into my previous plans because of the recent changes that we just know about. So what's coming next is still going to be the Nilou weapon comparison and followed by the constellation / refinement comparison. And yes, I know that the banner information is already out, but I don't have the time to do it yet. So we'll do weapon comparison, then the constellation / refinement comparison. Okay? I'll try to definitely do it before Nahida goes live. Before Nilou goes live. Alright, so thanks everyone for watching. I think I should add burning here. Yeah. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you guys next video. If you like the content, remember my video and click subscribe for more. Bye.